Today, we're going to continue our Radical Self-Care for Black Women series. And I'm going to dive a little bit into what I mean when I refer to self-care. Self-care is not just getting a manicure or getting a pedicure or having shopping therapy. It can include those things, but it's not just those things. Self-care is rooted in love. It refers to intentional activities or rituals that we participate or practice that improve or maintain or support overall well being. So, self care is a little bit deeper than some of the superficial things that we do sometimes, and we say, oh, it's self care. And I'm not putting that down because that can be included in your self care plan. But the foundation of self care is rooted in self compassion. This means that we listen to our minds, our bodies, and our souls. Then, what we do is we take the necessary steps or actions to respond to what our soul or our mind or our body is telling us. Participating in self care, it is crucial. It is very, very essential. It gives us, the opportunity to take care of our personal needs and to restore and renew ourselves on a daily basis. So, I'm going to give 8 benefits of self care. Number one, it restores energy. Self care is a re energizing activity or activities because it really is a continuum and it should be done on a daily basis if when we can. It reduces stress. Whenever you practice self care in its different forms, and I will go over the different areas of self care, reduces it reduces stress. Self care gives us fresh insight about life. Why? Because we're renewed, we're rejuvenated, and we've been re-energized. Um, Self care gives us a positive feeling of self worth and self being, and that's because we're taking the time that's necessary to look after ourselves, to look after our personhood. Self care also supports calmness and peace of mind. And in today's busy, busy world, we're all rushing, we're all busy, and we have so many responsibilities. And sometimes those responsibilities are not going to go anywhere. So, what can we do to calm our mind and to give ourselves a peace of mind? Self care can help, and it does help decrease stress and anxiety. Why? It's tied to the prior uh, benefit in that it supports our calmness. Self care increases self love, and it does this because we're showing ourselves and we're operating from a sense of compassion. We're showing ourselves the love and care that we need so that we can continue operating in an optimal capacity to do the things that we need to do, not only for others, but ourselves. Other people benefit from us taking care of ourselves. And that's just a fact. I cannot help somebody else if I'm exhausted, if I'm tired, if I'm drained. So self care helps us, as I mentioned early, to re-energize, renew our energy, to recalibrate our minds. It gives us that time to do what we need to do to ensure that we have the necessary things that we have to continue being ourselves and operating the way we need to. The other thing, or the eighth thing that self care does, practicing self care, is it supports better relationships. The first relationship it supports and improves is the relationship we have with ourselves. I listen to people who are giving and burning. You hear people saying, I'm burning the candle at both ends. Well, a person who's burning the candle at both ends cannot possibly be at 100% when they are supporting other folks, whether they are serving other folks, and they're definitely not at 100% and serving themselves. So, as I mentioned earlier, self care is a true act of self compassion. We show everyone else compassion in society. We really do. And as Black women, we're kind of brought up to expect to give all of our energy to other people and to kind of put our own needs and to tend to our own needs last. And that's something that radical self care for Black women is trying to minimize. We want people to give themselves the best that they have and then pour out from abundance as opposed to depletion. Hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Colette. I created this channel as a safe space with you in mind. I help Black women to embrace new seasons of their lives with purpose and joy by pursuing resilience, practicing self leadership, and by pivoting towards entrepreneurship. If anything I said resonates with you, welcome to the community. We'd love to have you. So, now I'm going to talk about the 5 areas of self care. And there are more because some people break it down into sub areas, but I'm just going to talk about the 5 major areas of self care. Number one, and they're not in any particular order, physical care. Caring for ourselves physically, the stuff that people see on the outside. And a lot of people are doing a great job of caring for themselves physically. And that's good. So, what we want to do is make sure that we're balanced and that we also care for ourselves emotionally. So, emotional care is the second component of self care. And as the series progresses, I'll talk more in depth about each of the 5 areas that we'll be covering during this series. The third area is mental, or some people call it intellectual care. Intellectual care and or mental care is important because everything that we do begins in our minds. The fourth component of self care is spiritual care. Some people refer to it as temple care. Spiritual care is extremely important, and I cannot emphasize enough that to me, it is one of the most important things in the entire area of self care. And the fifth component that we'll talk about during this series is social or relational care. Social or relational care is important. Why? Because we live in communities, we are part of communities. So, and we are social beings. We all know this. So, we have to spend or devote some time to caring for our social care, our social areas. A Psychology Today article, it talked about 3 things to consider when we're making or we're implementing a self-care practice, and when we want to do it on a consistent basis. So, number one, they suggest taking small steps. Why? Because small steps make a difference. You don't want to take huge, grandiose steps. Some people can do that. I personally cannot. Small steps help you in that it helps you to build your momentum. It helps you to look, okay, yesterday I took 1 step, today maybe you take 2 steps. And just the idea and the sense of, of accomplishment, it kind of helps us. It spurs us on to continue our journey, whatever that journey is. Right now, we're talking about a self care journey. So, small things really, really do make a difference. The second thing, number 2 to consider, is that when we're talking about self care, there is no one size fits all. There just isn't. We're all different. We all have different lifestyles. We all have different expectations, different talents, different skills, different abilities, different calls on our lives, different responsibilities. So, though I will be providing some tips on creating a simple self care plan, know that there is no one size fits all. So when I'm talking about, you know, self-care, take what I suggest and kind of weave it into your life the best way that you can, the way that it fits your life. Number 3, Self-care begins with giving yourself permission. Nobody else can give you permission to practice radical self-care. You have to give yourself permission. And sometimes as Black women, that's hard because what we have been trained to do or expected to do is, as I mentioned earlier, to see about the needs and the cares and the wants of everyone else before we look at ourselves and before we care about ourselves. And I know that you guys have all probably heard of the expression, or you've heard when you've traveled on an airline, for example, the flight attendants go over some of the safety protocols and they talk about some of the things that we want to do in the unfortunate event that that the plane is going to go down. The first thing they tell you to do is when the masks come down, is to inhale, to put the mask up to your face first. And that's really pointed to parents or people traveling with other folks. Why? Because our natural inclination is to see about our children or whoever's with us, our loved ones first, right? But if we aren't getting any oxygen and we can't breathe, we can't help anybody else. So, really, that's what self care is about. It is not an act of selfishness. It really isn't. It's an act of preservation in all of its forms. Okay. So, in an upcoming video, we will be talking about how to create a simple self care plan. But before I go, I want to encourage you to give yourself permission to practice radical self care. And you might do this by actually verbally saying, I give myself permission to practice radical self care. And say that every day until we do the next video, or you can continue saying it for however long you need to until you feel confident and comfortable enough to practice radical self care. You can say, for example, again, I give myself permission to prioritize my well being by practicing radical self care. I am in a course as a part of my radical self care. I've been in several courses, and one of the communities I'm in, our leader, our facilitator, had us write a permission slip. And I've done that in some of the courses I've taught, but I thought that that might be a good thing to suggest to some people who maybe feel uncomfortable saying, verbally, I give myself, permission to practice self care. You might consider writing down or writing a permission slip to yourself, saying that you give yourself permission to practice radical self care. So your permission slip may say, "Hey, I, Colette, give," or whatever your name is, I and then blank, give myself permission to prioritize my overall well-being by practicing radical self-care on a daily basis. And you can write it. Here's mine. I wrote it out. You may not be able to see it, but it's my permission slip. I signed it. I dated it. Okay. You might decide to do something like that. And I would encourage you to read it out loud, uh, maybe 2, 3 times a day. And you may say, well, why do you encourage that? I encourage that because something happens when you write something or when you say something out loud. It activates or initiates a mind shift change. It just does. And a lot of us, especially Black women, we have to um, kind of have a paradigm shift when it comes to caring for ourselves. And I'm not just talking about physically. Again, we talked about the 5 areas of care when we're speaking of self-care. We talked about physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and social. So If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to get more content about the self-care series that we're going on right now, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you will be notified when I upload new videos. You may consider sharing this with other individuals who you think can benefit from practicing radical self-care. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them in the comments field. I do go through my comments, I read them, and I do respond. So until we talk again, practice radical self-care. And remember, you do not need permission from anyone else. Give yourself give yourself permission to practice radical self-care. And if you do need permission, I'm giving you permission. Practice radical self-care. Talk soon.